10:42, late news hour on 5 Live. Experts have warned of the growing threat that women and minors pose with links to Islamic State, suggesting that the number of women and children returning to Britain from Syria and Iraq has been significantly underestimated. According to a new report from King's College London published tonight, the danger of women returning from those countries has been massively miscalculated. The report from the International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation, based at the university, found women had recently been actively involved in plots across the world. Out of 850 British citizens affiliated with ISIS in Iraq or Syria, 425 returned to the UK. Of that 425, only 2 women and 4 minors were confirmed. Gina Vale is one of the report's authors. So you've analysed, Gina, all the data in this. Welcome to the programme. What gives you cause to say that we've undercounted the women and children who've returned back to Britain, first of all?
At the moment, there is a shortage in data that is available for us. We have compiled data for 80 countries across the world, and in many cases, we're seeing a significant proportion of women minors who have travelled to Islamic State and those who have returned. On average, for the 80 countries that we have, we're seeing a 5% return for women and about 17% for children. So to look at only 2 women and 4 minors that have returned to the UK out of a total of 425, we're seeing this as a vast underestimation of the potential for women and minors to be returning from Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and maybe a potential dearth in public available data from HMG.
Right. Well, there's 2 issues there, isn't there? Is it the dearth in data, or are there returns not being recorded?
Both. We're seeing a shortage in data, specifically from the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa. Out of over 18,800 affiliates that we have registered inside Iraq and Syria, we're seeing a very, very small number of women and minors that have been recorded. In some cases, only 6 or 2% for minors. For Western Europe, we're seeing greater data reports. However, for the United Kingdom in particular, we're seeing very low numbers of women and minors returning. And this may be on account of women or minors being detained in the conflict zone, either in internally displaced persons camps or in detention centres within Iraq or in Syria. It may be that women and children are travelling undetected to third-party countries or third-party conflict zones, but it's likely that we're seeing a public shortage in available data for returnees for women and minors.
Do we know what roles these women are given and what threat do they pose upon their return?
Yes, so traditionally, up until the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, we're seeing women taking on very passive and domestic roles. Predominantly as wives and mothers. Their primary role was to raise children in the ideology of Islamic State as citizens of the Caliphate. But in 2017, we saw a broadcast of women in a video, and it was the first evidence that we saw of women as frontline combatants. And this was then confirmed within IS formal propaganda in March this year. Upon their return, we've seen women who have been trained in using weapons and, as I said, frontline combatants. We've seen women as suicide operatives, both unaccompanied and with their children in some cases. And we're seeing increasing numbers of attacks that have been coordinated or plotted by women in Western countries, both inspired by and directly coordinated by Islamic State. So there is a significant risk that women may pose. However, we need to see this as not a blanket generalization. We need to look at each individual case in a nuanced manner and try and respond to a potential threat that there may or may not be.
Your report also calls for nuanced consideration in the way that the minors, the young children who return here, are treated. And it calls for a clear rehabilitative rather than a punitive approach. Why?
Children from the very first years, even those that have been born under Islamic State, and of which we have counted at least 730 cases of foreign minors being born under Islamic State territory. Even from the earliest years, these children have been indoctrinated using ISIS propaganda. They're encouraged to listen to stories of martyrs and encouraged to compete for suicide operations. But we need to understand that children may or may not have a choice in their actions. We need to look at subcategorization of minors, those as infants up until the age of 4 that have been born and are passive citizens of the caliphate, those from 5 to 14 who have undergone psychological indoctrination and military training in camps, and those 15 to 17 as teenagers who in many cases have travelled independently and have the same radicalisation drivers or similar to adults.
There's been much talk today about these two members of ISIL dubbed the Beetle Cell, and if they are extradited to America, Britain will not object to the death penalty for them. What do you think, what kind of effect will that have on some of the women and children who return here? And does that help with a rehabilitative process, or does it hinder it?
It's important that we work with local and regional authorities in order to identify the status of nationals and ensure they're dealt with in accordance to international law, whether this is men, women or minors. So for those who are returning from Islamic State territory to countries like the United Kingdom, other Western nations, we need to look at each individual case and understand that the roles that these women and minors have played, whether that be violent or non-violent, the drivers in which they became involved, and the reasons in which they became dissociated with the group. Only in this instance can we form the correct and tailored response that these individuals require.
And from the huge amount of data that you looked at, Gina, is it your considered view that up until now, both the security services and the general public have underestimated the threat that women pose?
I think that's definitely the case for some women. We have seen women as well as minors who have returned from Islamic State territory that have been involved with plots against Western nations. This is more prevalent, however, in the Middle East and North Africa region. We have also seen women who have led and participated in plots that have been directed by Islamic State at a distance, those who have had contact with Islamic State members whilst in Iraq and Syria. So there is a significant threat for certain individuals that carry a high level of commitment to Islamic State's cause and therefore feel that it is their duty to mobilise for that cause. However, as I said, it's something that we need to look on an individual basis, and we must not and we cannot use a blanket policy for all of these women and children. Otherwise, we risk alienating and further disenfranchising and isolating this group.
Thank you very much for sharing your findings with us. Grateful to you. Gina Vale, who's one of the report's authors from the King's College London International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation.